Welcome back to The Haunted Beard. My name is Jake, and I have been making my way through and reviewing the entire Halloween franchise. With the exception of the very first film, these have all been first-time watches for me. Last night, I finished watching Rob Zombie's Halloween Part 2, and I've got a few things to say about it. I've definitely got some thoughts, so let's get into it. This film takes place 2 years later after Zombie's first Halloween movie. And really, we are just following Laurie Strode and watching her kind of deal with the aftermath and really just the trauma that she dealt with and went through in part one, while also kind of preparing for Michael Myers' return to Haddonfield, because you know there's going to be another showdown. Michael Myers is going to return to the scene. Now, to start off, Rob Zombie's Halloween Part 2 seems to be maybe the most divisive movie in the entire Halloween franchise. It's certainly one of them. It seems like the vast majority of fans, at least from kind of the perception I get from kind of reading the internet and things like that, most people seem to not like this film or are pretty down on it. And I understand why. I totally get the criticisms and the issues that people have with this movie. If you absolutely hate it and think it's terrible, I get it. But I also think I understand why there are some pretty hardcore fans of it and think that it's quite a good film as well. To start off, my thoughts are this, is that what I really kind of appreciate about this movie is that this really truly feels like Rob Zombie's vision. I watched the director's cut of the film, and so maybe you kind of get more so of that than from the theatrical cut. But if nothing else, I can say that this really truly feels like his vision. This is a singularly kind of unique film. It has its own identity. And I think that that's a pretty high compliment given the fact that this is already a film that, exists within a pre-existing franchise. And being that his first film, Zombie's first Halloween film, is pretty much similar to the original Halloween film. Obviously, there are some differences with the first third of the film being totally different, but then the rest of it really follows pretty similarly and hits mostly the same beats as the first film. And so I kind of had, I guess I didn't truly know what to expect, but I kind of had a little bit of an expectation that this would probably follow somewhat of a similar path to the the first Halloween Part 2 from 1981 by Rick Rosenthal. But it doesn't. And it was just kind of, I love that it kind of subverted those expectations. It just felt like it had such a unique individual identity that this was the movie that Rob Zombie really wanted to make. And we really got to see his voice, his vision on the screen. And that is something that I think is sorely lacking in at least mainstream cinema today. And so it was kind of really refreshing to be able to see that. I'd rather see a director make a movie that was their vision, that didn't get meddled with by the producers or, focus grouped and all that stuff. Like, I just want to see the director's vision, good or bad, because at least more often than not, it's going to be something different. It's going to be something that feels unique, as I think this film does. I feel like I'm still fully trying to get my thoughts and kind of flesh out my opinion on this movie, but I'm just kind of fascinated by it. There is plenty of stuff in it that I think doesn't really work or isn't very good or could probably have been cut out completely, but there's also some really good stuff in there that I think is really good and really effective. And so I would rather, have a director be ambitious and swing for the fences and see the movie that they wanted to make, good or bad, than just them playing it safe. Like, you can tell when a movie has been, picked apart by the producers and they're just trying to make the same old, just mass appeal, mass audience, just trying to churn out another product to return as much money as they can versus something that is truly sort of an individually, uniquely created film from the voice of the director. And this feels like that. And so even all the bad things are at least bad in an interesting way. And even the stuff for me that didn't really work, I was still kind of fascinated by it because, again, it's so singularly his vision. So let's kind of get into it more specifically. First of all, the the opening 25 minutes I think are really good. You get this just really kind of visceral, gruesome opening as we see Laurie being wheeled into the hospital, and just some close-ups on all of her wounds and just bloody and all that stuff. Just this really sort of, gory, visceral opening that really kind of grabs your attention. And then you see her getting surgery, which is just a gnarly scene. And then it's not very long into it where Myers busts into the hospital, and the scene where Octavia Spencer's character gets killed is brutal. Like, holy smokes. I mean, there's just a few moments in this movie where I would just kind of like sitting there, like, just really, I don't know. I was just I was so kind of grabbed by just some of the imagery and just some of the sequences that I was like holy smokes. Like, you just really feel just this intensity and just the sound effects, just the brutality of some of the kills. This may be one of the most brutal horror movies maybe I've ever seen. It would certainly be kind of up there in the conversation. Just everything with specifically that kill, but a handful of them with just the sound effects and the music and the way they're shot. This thing pulls no punches. I mean, it hits you in the face with its kills, man. I mean, it just brings it, and I mean, it's just brutal. One of my main critiques with the first film was that I thought Zombie just kind of way overdid and overused the really shaky cam handheld effect was just way overused. It was just too much. Felt like a lot of the sequences you just couldn't even really get your bearings. With this one though, I really think he dials it back a handful of notches. You get a handful of more just kind of steady shots and wider shots, and it just seems overall it's kind of more a little more just patient in its camera selection with just the movement. They're just a lot more staticky, and I just really like that he seemed to dial it back. I feel like we could really sort of kind of savor the kills. That was another critique that I had with the first film. I felt like the kills were just so fast paced that you didn't really get to savor them, whereas this film has a handful of kills that there's kind of more of a build up, and it just feels like you can see more and you just feel more, and you kind of just it's just more effective, and there's just less cuts and just wider shots and less shaky cam. And I just thought that really amplified the intensity with the kills. It made them more brutal, it made them more effective, and so I really liked that. I really thought that he dialed back just the overuse of the shaky cam. That worked really well. Now what ends up happening though is Myers breaks into the hospital and he's after Laurie Strode. She escapes. She gets to this little security booth and the security guard comes by. He ends up getting killed. This is all just a great sequence where there's some suspense building. You get just sort of this genuine sequence that kind of unflows. It's not in this hurry. There's just it takes its time. It's more patient, and all this is really good. The first 25 minutes are really good. Then Michael breaks into the security booth and he stabs Laurie Strode. It cuts to black, and then she wakes up. And you realize that the whole thing was a dream. And you're like, why? Like, and so he has just this great opening, and then the whole thing's a dream, and it's like he just undid all that. And so it kind of leaves it with a little bit of a bittersweet taste to it, because then it's like, well, none of that even mattered. There was no consequences. That we just had this, I thought, pretty great opening 25 minutes, and then, oh, it's a dream sequence, and now we're 2 years later. And so it's like, I love the sequence, but at the same time, there's kind of a bad decision, I think, made at the end of it. There's a handful of dream sequences used throughout this film. I think there's like at least 3 of them in the first hour of the movie, which is just too many. He goes back to that well too many times. But there is still good stuff in this film despite some of the bad decisions. And so there's just a lot of bittersweet in here. I know one of the main issues that people have with this movie is the white horse and that sort of imagery or symbolism or motif, whatever you want to call it, and then also sort of the, I guess, ghost figures that are used with young Michael and his mom. I totally understand the critiques of why people didn't like it and why they think it's just junk, and fair enough. It doesn't fully work for me either, but again, in a way, it's like I kind of appreciate the effort. I kind of appreciate him trying to add sort of this, artistic, stylistic choice that you wouldn't typically have in a slasher film. And so again, it's kind of bittersweet. Like it doesn't really work all that great, and I think there's too much of the ghost, the young Michael ghost and the mom ghost, and things like that, and it's not maybe super established real well. But at the same time, I just kind of appreciate the ambition. I appreciate him just trying to do something different. Again, it's sort of an expectation that you don't expect to get sort of visual metaphors and stuff like that in a slasher movie, and it's like he just went for it. Like this is what he wanted to do. So I'm like, you know what, man? It's like I kind of am on board with it a little bit. I at least like the effort of him trying to do something different. And so at the end, it's like it doesn't fully work, but again, I appreciate the effort, so I kind of like it. Another big thing that Zombie does is with the character of Loomis. Loomis is kind of a villain in this movie, and to be honest with you, it's like he doesn't even really belong in this movie. You've got the main plot, that whole trajectory is obviously with Laurie Strode and then the return of Michael Myers back to Haddonfield. And then you've got sort of the side story subplot with Loomis as he's going around the country on this, book tour, and he's kind of portrayed like this, villain. He's kind of this, self-absorbed, egotistical type of character who everybody thinks is just, trying to profit off of the horrible tragedy and massacre that, that occurred. But he doesn't really affect the main plot at all, or if memory serves, he doesn't really interact with any of the main characters in the film until the very, very end. And so it's like you could almost completely eliminate his entire story and you don't really lose anything. And so again, I kind of admire just the bold choice of almost turning Loomis into a villain. It's like I mean, it's just kind of a gutsy choice and a bold choice. Again, it's like it doesn't fully work and it probably doesn't really belong, but again, to kind of make that choice is kind of just like mind-blowing that Zombie actually went there and decided to do it. So in a strange way, it's like I kind of respect it to a degree, but I mean, overall, I just think I mean, Loomis's story doesn't really develop or add a whole lot to the overall, story of the film. I want to single out one individual kill that I really liked. I did like the brutality early on of Octavia Spencer's kill, but I also like the kill where Myers on his way back to Haddonfield has kind of become this sort of wandering nomad, and he's walking through this farm, cornfield, whatever it is, late at night. It's just a farm field. These guys drive up on him. They end up beating him, over the head, knocking him down. But I just love the way that this scene is shot because it's at night and the only light we get is just from the headlights of the truck, and so you get these cool like silhouettes. And I just really like the lighting and how that sequence was shot and lit. Really stuck out to me. Again, Myers goes in there and just, I mean, destroys these guys. And it's just I think a really great scene that stuck out for me. The two performances that really stuck out for me were, first of all, Scout Taylor Compton as Laurie Strode. And I think she's really strong here. Just her portrayal of, dealing with just the trauma. I mean, it's just, she's in like full PTSD mode. She's probably depressed too. I mean, just got a handful of, mental health disorders and everything. There's I think some pretty effective scenes with her and her therapist, but just kind of the range of emotions that she is required to display here. I think she pulls it off pretty well. And I mean, she is just a severely damaged and broken person. And you just really, at least I did, I just really felt the pain and just the trauma that she is going through. I thought her performance here was really solid. I also really liked Brad Dourif. I thought he was really strong. He's not in it as much. Obviously, he's more of a supporting character, but I thought the scene in particular where he finds Annie is, man, I thought he was just really great in that. It could have been an opportunity to really kind of overact and overplay it, but man, he does really good, and I think it's a really powerful scene. Speaking of Annie's death, this is another highlight standout scene for me. When Myers finally gets into the house, I love how Zombie sort of handles this sequence and the following sequences, because when Annie sees that Myers is in the house and she takes off running, screaming, and it goes to slow-mo and you just see the look of horror on her face as she's screaming, and then it cuts and you don't see it. But you know something bad obviously happened. Well, then it picks up to Laurie, and she's coming back home with her friend, and she goes into the house. And Myers already planted that seed that Laurie's going to find it. Laurie's going to find her. And so you're just waiting, you're dreading that moment because you know what's about to happen, but he didn't show you anything. And I kind of love the restraint and the subtlety there. By not fully showing Annie's death, it really heightens the suspense when Laurie gets home, because we are just waiting to see, what happened, and we are dreading the moment when she finds out what happens. And then as Laurie is making her way upstairs, he cuts back really quickly to the attack against Annie. But he doesn't show it a whole lot. It's more of just the sound, which is just great. And it's cutting back and forth as Laurie's making her way up the stairs. It's cutting back and forth between that and the attack on Annie. And then all of a sudden she turns the corner and sees into the bathroom, and you just see just the horror, massacre, blood all over the walls. And you see her on the floor, and it's like, holy smokes. Man, I just thought those however many minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, that entire sequence, man, I thought was just excellent. I thought the editing there, the pacing there, the performances there, just that entire 10 minutes or however long it is sequence, I thought was just fantastic. Maybe my favorite part of the entire film. Let's talk about the end. The end is, I feel like a lot of this movie, a bit of a mixed bag. First of all, Loomis finds out that he's watching TV and he finds out that they've got Myers surrounded in this little shack. Now, the next scene, he is all of a sudden there. I don't know how he got there so fast, but it was just like, he's watching it on TV and like 10 seconds later, he's just at the scene. Like, I don't know, that was just a really weird thing. I was like, how did he get there so fast? But nevertheless, the entire, police squad, the entire city police are surrounded this cabin where Myers is with Laurie Strode. Loomis breaks in, and, Michael attacks him. They bust through the wall. Then we see Michael, and he says, die. And now, it's kind of I think having Michael speak, one of the things too that he does throughout the film, some of the kills, is you actually hear him grunt, and you see his face quite a bit throughout this. I don't really like any of those decisions. I think any sort of speaking, any sort of sounds, especially when you can see his face, it just kind of humanizes him, which I think is kind of detrimental. So I don't really like that. I do like, however, though, that they kind of officially kill Michael Myers, but then they kind of pull sort of a Halloween 4 to 5 where kind of his spirit seemingly gets passed on to Laurie Strode. At least, I guess maybe that's one way to interpret it. Again, it gets a little kind of a little messy, a little weird in the end with Ghost Mama Myers, Laurie Strode, who seemingly gets shot and killed, and then she's in this white room with the horse and Ghost Mama Myers walking down, which is the same sort of vision that young Michael Myers is talking to his mom about in the very opening scene of the movie. And so, I don't know, there's maybe up to a little bit of an interpretation there. I guess all that to say, what I got out of it is that to me, it just seems to be a story about a boy who just wants to be with his mom. And that's kind of what I got out of it. So, anyways, that is some of my thoughts about Halloween 2. I feel like there is a handful more that I could say in the next couple of days. But while this movie definitely has some stuff about it that I think is not good and doesn't work, there is some stuff in here that I think is really solid. And again, I'm just kind of fascinated by this. It just feels so unique and so unlike anything I would have really expected for this to be. And it's one that I feel like I'm going to be thinking about at least for the next couple of days. It's one that I do want to return to. I would like to watch this again, which is to me one of the highest compliments I can pay a movie. Anytime a movie wants, you know, causes me to want to return to it, that for me is high praise. And this is a movie I will be thinking about, which is again high praise. I'm just fascinated by it. It's just interesting, even in its bad ways. It's interesting. It's kind of a beautiful mess. I really have no clue what sort of grade to give this. I really have no idea. But I am more on the positive side than the negative. I think I'm going to be at like if I have to put a number on it, maybe like a 6.5, somewhere in there. But the grade for this, I feel like, is kind of irrelevant. This is a very interesting movie, and I understand why it's divisive. I feel like it's kind of a love it or hate it, and I'm more on the positive side than the negative. So I can definitely see myself returning to this again because it's just interesting. It is just an interesting movie. So those are my thoughts on Halloween 2. And next up, we have got Halloween 2018. And I am looking forward to it. That is what we got coming up next. They did, from what I understand, another kind of rewrite of the timeline there to kind of reconnect this back to the original film. So Halloween 2018 is coming up next. We've only got 2 movies left in this series. So we will see you next time. Halloween 2018 on The Haunted Beard. See you then.